Hello there and welcome to Meet the Taxidermist. My name's Phil and I look after the stuffed animals in the museum in Hastings, and we call these taxidermy. Now, for many of you, the word taxidermy might conjure up a view of a Victorian man in a smoke-filled room stuffing animals that he caught on a trip to Africa or some far-flung country, or one of the archetypal villains of a movie such as Paddington or 101 Dalmatians. But nowadays, we have a new breed of taxidermists, and our guest today is a pioneer in this field. She's an ethical taxidermist, so I'd like to introduce Jazmine Miles-Long. Hello, Jazmine.
Hi, Phil.
So, to kick us off, hopefully you're all getting it okay. Jazmine, what exactly is a taxidermist?
So, a taxidermist is basically someone that preserves the skin of an animal and puts the skin over a sculpture that they've made using different kinds of materials, and therefore preserving it for use in museums or people's homes. And I think the earliest piece of taxidermy was in 15-something, so it's a very old practice. And the materials and processes are still pretty similar. They've just kind of developed into... The materials are quite similar, but the processes have developed to make taxidermy better.
Yeah, basically. So instead of using horrible chemicals as well, you're using other things which aren't harmful.
Yeah, we don't use arsenic anymore, or lead, or mercury, all these things which old taxidermy have under the skin. So they're a lot safer. Modern taxidermy is a lot safer to handle. Yes, and if anyone is touching old taxidermy, they should be very careful because it might have, poisons on it.
Yeah, we're always very careful in the museum. We wear gloves and masks, and always, we make sure we wash our hands as well after handling it. So, just waiting to see if there's any questions popping up. No, nothing at the moment. I don't know, maybe you could tell us about a famous local taxidermist.
George Bristow?
He would be a great one, actually. Give us a quick rundown of his story.
So basically, George Bristow was a taxidermist in Hastings about 100 years ago, and during that time a lot of rare birds had been spotted, and a lot of these birds had never been seen in the Hastings area before, and ornithologists later on in the 1960s kind of decided that during that time a lot of these bird sightings were fraudulent, and so struck off all of the birds seen in the area during that time, and then they didn't want to kind of point out anyone in particular for the fraudulent behaviour, but unfortunately George Bristow was St Leonard's local taxidermist, and he had worked on a lot of the birds. Some of the ones in Hastings Museum on display will have been done by, or were done by, George Bristow, I assume. And so the press decided that he was this kind of con man, and vilified him in the press, as you were saying about taxidermists being, brilliant characters for villains. He was portrayed in this way, but it's not proven, and he wasn't alive to actually defend himself at the time. So
yeah, that's really unfortunate. Yeah.
And you can see his plaque on Silchester Road, but it's those kind of stories, and as you were saying in the beginning, the stereotypical kind of image of a taxidermist is this kind of very masculine, hunting, collecting kind of thing that's still in people's minds, and they don't even realise that it's still a craft that happens today.
Yeah.
And it's people like George Bristow that kind of keep that image alive, basically.
Yeah.
Of what I should be.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks for telling us about George Bristow, because I feel like I'm still learning more about him. So, if you're just joining us, welcome to Meet the Taxidermist live. And if you want to ask any questions, please fire away. They'll appear for me here on my little screen, and I will ask Jazmine, our expert taxidermist, to answer the questions. So while we're waiting for questions to come in, where exactly do you get the animals that you stuff?
So everything that I work on has died from natural causes, which was a decision that I made when I started doing taxidermy in the first place. At the time I was vegetarian and just kind of frightened of this, the stigma behind being a taxidermist, so I decided in the first place that would be my kind of ethos.
Yeah.
And so mostly they're hit by cars, or they've flown into a window, or maybe a cat's dragged them into someone's home, or they've gone to a rescue centre and maybe passed away from illness or old age, things like this. And they're just donated to me by members of the public that find me online, or friends and family. Or when I work for a museum, I'll use an object out of their freezer stock. So often someone will find something really special and they'll not know what to do with it, and I'll phone up a museum and it'll go into the museum's freezer waiting for one day to be mounted for the collection. So that's the kind of...
Yeah, I'll have to keep you in mind if I spot anything, especially if it's something rare.
Yeah, of course, yeah. No, anything rare or beautiful,
Brilliant.
Not, I love pigeons, but there's a lot of pigeons out there. I don't need any more, poor things.
So, what would be the weirdest or most exciting thing that you've ever stuffed?
So, I'd say probably the most exciting project I did, because everything I've done, everything I work on has died from natural causes, and it's generally kind of local, animals that I work with. I don't get to work on anything particularly exotic unless it was maybe domesticated, like parakeet. But I did a cheetah for the Booth Museum in Brighton in 2000 and I've written it down. I think it's 2017.
I think I saw pictures.
And that was really exciting because not only was it a cheetah, which is cool and not something that I'm going to get to work on every day, but that cheetah had died in the 80s, and the curator of the Booth Museum at the time had skinned the cheetah and put the skin in a preservative liquid with the kind of hopes that he'd get the time to mount it up himself or make it into a cabinet skin or something. But then the museum financial cuts in the 80s and things really, cut their workforce, and it meant that he didn't have the same amount of time. So the skin was still there in 2017, so the museum decided they'd work with me to figure out how we could actually mount it up into an animal, and we managed to. And the only way we managed to financially do it was through doing an event with the public where they all paid for a ticket to come, and they got to help me actually sew up the skin and mount up the cheetah. And it's really lovely that if you go to the Booth Museum and have a look, the cheetah's on display, but next to her is all of the names of the people that actually had a hand in helping me mount her up, so they'll kind of memorialise forever with her as an object in the museum.
Oh, that's brilliant.
That's probably the coolest project.
Yeah. So, why would you say taxidermy is important?
That's a good question. So, for me, as a taxidermist, I do a lot of talks and things in museums, I guess I think one of the main reasons museums like me to come along is also to kind of justify their collection, because most museums' collections are from an older time where they will have been, killed and collected. But now, today, it's still applicable to use, because it's a really amazing way to get up close to nature, for one thing, see animals from all over the world, and without actually kind of harming them if they've died of natural causes. I'm not putting it in a zoo or in a cage and getting up close. And also, as we were talking about the chemicals earlier, the taxidermy that I make doesn't have any chemicals, so if it was to be used for a handling collection and maybe used for a children's workshop or something like that, it means they can actually touch it without any harm to themselves.
Yeah.
And things like that. And also the fact that my taxidermy, because it's modern, it's not as kind of important as a historical object. So if it was in a hand-in collection, it wouldn't be damaging any of these older pieces, if that makes sense. And also, I just think it can be done in a really beautiful way, and it's a lovely way to enjoy nature, really. Although that might sound a bit bizarre to people because it is a dead animal, but I guess there's different ways of looking at that.
I think it's really important that we keep these sorts of skills alive, so that we not only can understand the collections from the past and what we're doing now, kind of to biodiversity, if you like, but also for preserving animals that we have now, that are endangered, so that we can educate people about them through actual specimens.
Absolutely, it's so important, and like at the moment with all the environmental crises going on, it seems to me like natural history is such an amazing way to use that as educational. And it is really bizarre to me that it's one of the least funded areas in museums, much less so than anthropology and archaeology and all these things, even though it's so important. And also, as well as them just being good for education, they are actually records of the genetics within this animal. It's real skin, so if we wanted to look at something that is endangered or even extinct, we can take a piece of skin, and we've got the scientific data to actually do other things with it in the future. So it's really important.
So we spoke about George Bristow earlier. Is he your favourite, or do you have another favourite taxidermist of the past?
A historic one? My favourite kind of aesthetically would be Joseph Cullingford. I don't know if the museum has any. I'm really bad on the history of him. He's someone that I should actually study a bit more, because I just love his aesthetics. And he would basically make these big, not necessarily big, but these just really clean box cases, and put maybe one or two examples of the same species in there, and it was always very scientific, and these boxes would stack. And he's definitely kind of my main inspiration for the work I make, because I make very, if you have a look on my social media and stuff, I make very clean, big cases with small animals in them. So I'd say I'm probably he's probably my favourite historically. But I mean, there's so many amazing, taxidermists, like Spicer, was it Peter Spicer? I'm going to get his name wrong. Anyway, Spicer, I'll call him. He used to paint these amazing backgrounds, and there's some beautiful older pieces out there. But I'm definitely more for the more minimalist kind of.
Is there anyone working today who you particularly like?
So there's a few taxidermists out there that I really like the work of. There's some artists like Claire Morgan and Polly Morgan that I'm not sure if I think Claire Morgan maybe does classify herself as a taxidermist as well, but I'm not sure about Polly Morgan. But they make very beautiful. Claire Morgan makes very dynamic sculptures using animals, and Polly Morgan makes very abstract, using kind of skin and visceral kind of sculptures. And then actual kind of hard, taxidermists only. I mean, everyone I'm stating is actually a woman. I'm sorry to the guys out there, but it's kind of the dynamic of the taxidermy community has changed quite a lot. We seem to be a lot of women, I'm not sure. And also with social media, some people get quite a lot of confusion through social media, maybe trolling. I personally haven't. I'm not sure, why some people do and some people don't. So it's you have to have quite a close community to support each other. And there's artists such as Danielle Franken in the Netherlands, and she makes very clean taxidermy without cases and things. And I often message her, for instance, for advice. And Ellie Kay, who's near London, I message her for advice as well. There's not that many of us, but there's some really great people working out there.
I have to admit, I can't think of any any blokes who are alive who do taxidermy. I've sort of sometimes thought, oh, should I have a go at it myself? But I don't know. I'm a little bit squeamish sometimes about dead things. Yeah, you're right. So Jazmine's put on a very lovely activity for you on a video on our Facebook page. And do you want to show what you can make, Jazmine? So you can make your very own. What do we call it, Jazmine?
It's basically it's kind of like a paper mache kind of thing, but it's loose.
Yeah.
Bind-up method.
Yeah.
Which is what I use inside my mammal taxidermy. So it's a bind-up rabbit.
Yeah. So it's essentially the same kind of method, except that the skin is made of paper.
Yes, and you can do it at home, and anyone can have a go.
I guess if you wanted, you could use bits of fabric for the skin as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Anything. It's just I do any animal as well. It's just I just wanted to show that the bind-up method, where you wrap string around something, can really build up a great sculpture. Not necessarily just for taxidermy, but it's a really fun.
Yeah.
way to...
And I have to admit, I had a go myself. Made a little white rabbit. He's a bit fat. But I had a real fun time doing it, so I thoroughly recommend you doing that little activity. Right, so I'm trying to think of what other questions I had on my list. Yeah. What other questions have we got on that list?
Sorry, I can hear my dog.
Probably wants to ask a question. Where's my food?
Probably.
So if anybody wants to ask us any questions, do fire away now.
So I could talk about how I make the taxidermy, perhaps.
Yeah. So what is the process of making it?
It's all everything has different processes depending on whether it's a bird or a mammal, or obviously reptiles or fish. I only work with birds and mammals, and basically with the birds, you're removing the skin of the bird, and the only thing, so my dog is. Can you hear her barking?
Yeah, it's all right.
Sorry. My partner's down there somewhere. I don't know what they're doing. But the body of the bird, I recreate and I carve it out of a wooden, a big lump of balsa wood. So I basically recreate the structure of the main part of the bird out of balsa wood. I'm just going to get my dog. I'm really sorry.
That's all right. So, when you make your paper rabbit, you can do it any colour you like. I just used some white wall paint that I had in the kitchen cupboard, but you could paint it any colour. Right, sorry Jazmine.
Hello, sorry.
That's all right. So, I wonder what I could ask. What's the smallest thing you've ever stuffed?
So tiny birds are the smallest, and they're probably the most challenging as well. I'd say in general that mammals are harder, because to create their face, you're sculpting all of the muscles under the face with clay.
Yeah.
And if you do a good mammal, it's kind of, I feel like it's always a great achievement. But with birds, when it's tiny birds, if you think a bird has a certain amount of feathers, and as they get smaller, they kind of have tinier and less almost. So if you're losing feathers through the skinning process, you've got less to work with.
Yeah.
And I've done, tiny tree creepers and fire crests and things and wrens. And basically, you're just scaling down the same processes, but using tweezers instead of your hands, and just carving a tiny little wooden body to go inside.
Yeah. What's the biggest thing you've ever stuffed?
The biggest thing I've ever done is the cheetah at the Booth Museum. Yeah. So before that, kind of, I've skinned deers and things. I've never done a full, deer, but it was more badgers and foxes were kind of my main larger animal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think before the cheetah, I definitely have done a lot more kind of tiny birds and focused on smaller animals, and that's not necessarily because that's what I want to do. I mean, I'd love to do, say, a horse or something, but it is dependent on the jobs I get and also what I can find.
Yeah, and sometimes it's difficult to get the right materials as well.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So is there one particular animal that if you got the opportunity to stuff one, what would it be?
I would love to do some kind of monkey or, some kind of primate or something like that. I would love to do because it would have to be through a museum, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to do something like that in the future. Because the challenge of like sculpting the face, because they have a lot of, depending on what species, you have a lot of skin on show, which has no fur, which would mean a lot of sculpting and casting and different techniques, because you can't just use the skin, because it does dry and a bit aged, and also with the skin, where the skin is kind of bald, the same on birds, around the eyes and the legs and things, it all fades from colour. So on a rabbit, for instance, the inside of the ears and the pads of the feet, and it all has to be repainted afterwards. Which is why you can get some terrible looking taxidermy animals that have got really bright lipstick and stuff. And it's not about the taxidermist necessarily being bad. Taxidermist is just painting is yet another skill on top of all of the other ones that you have to do. And it's probably my least favourite part of it, to be honest, but
So do you have some contacts in zoos who will perhaps send some animals like a monkey that's been passed away?
No. The thing is, if I did a monkey, I'd have to do it through some kind of institution as well or something, because of the laws around taxidermy.
Of course.
But hopefully a museum will get a donation and need to have one mounted up at some point. That would be great. And it would be a really fun project for us to follow, perhaps. Yeah, of course, for sure.
I'm still waiting for a question from the audience. We've got a grand total of 9 viewers according to my phone, but one question I'd quite like to ask is if you want to get started with taxidermy and have a go, what's the best way to start?
So when I started about 13 years ago, there wasn't any kind of online tutorials or anything like that. If you're kind of curious before spending any money or buying any materials, I recommend just having a little browse on maybe YouTube or something to have a look and see kind of what the process maybe looks like. There's a few good books out there you can now get as well. There's a really good one by Carl Church. If you googled Carl Church taxidermy, he's got a PDF book on birds, and it's only about a £5 for the PDF, and that takes you through the whole process. And then basically it's kind of just having a go and getting stuck in, and the skinning process itself is kind of such a challenge to overcome before you even start to build the sculpture of the body and then put the skin on. I just recommend having a go at kind of maybe doing cabinet skins or something, which is where you essentially skin and wash and preserve the skin, and then you kind of mount it, just as a skin. It's good practice, unless you want to do the whole hog, but then you just need less materials. All you'd need would be a scalpel, really, maybe some tweezers. I use borax, which is a type of salt, to get some grip when I'm skinning, but you could grind up some rice instead if you don't have that at home.
Oh, right.
And just have a go, basically, and it takes a lot of practice. So I'd say it probably took me about 3 years to feel like I knew what I was doing ish, and I'm still learning every day. And I still think that I'll do something that someone else will think is amazing, and I think it's terrible.
Yeah.
I still have a very critical eye on what I make, which is good. It's the only way I'll progress. So
that's right. Yeah.
yeah. So I just and it's a really stressful, I'd say, profession, because you never know if it's going to work or not. So you might spend hours working on something for it just to fall apart.
Yeah.
So I just say, just be patient and take your time and don't worry. And if you've got something you want to have a go at skinning, you can start. If you get really overwhelmed, you can put it back in the freezer and try again another day. When I started, I thought you had to do everything all in one day, beginning to end. But then I learned you can go in and out of the freezer as much as you like and just kind of be much calmer about it.
Yeah.
Which made my practice get so much better.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. So, are there any rules or laws that you should check out before you embark on a hobby or career as a taxidermist?
Yes. So anyone can be a taxidermist. If you're going to start selling things, you need to really look at general licenses and Article 10 licenses, things which you need to legally work with certain animals. But if you're not selling them and you're just going to have a go, it's totally fine. But there's a few species that you can't work with at all, such as otters, bats, slow worms, water voles, anything listed under Schedule 5, CITES Annex Schedule 5. But also, even saying that can be overwhelming for someone that's wanting to start. So I recommend, if anyone's got any questions like that or worries, to contact the Guild of Taxidermists, which is a UK group, which, if you become a member, it gives you legal protection, to help with these things, and also just really great advice. And there's a few good Facebook groups as well for UK taxidermy kind of forums. So if you found something and you weren't sure, you could ask on there. But if you wanted to pick up just a pigeon or a squirrel or something like that, so long as you can prove, or so long as you write down where it was found and when it was found and that it died of natural causes, you're totally safe to work on it. We're very lucky in this country, because in other countries, every time you find, even just a dead squirrel by the side of the road, you have to get a police report number to work with it and things like this. So even though our laws are strict in the right way to help our wildlife, they don't make it too difficult to be a taxidermist or a hobbyist taxidermist if you wanted to just have a go.
Yeah. So let's.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah,
if
that
anyone had any
does.
questions,
Yeah.
they're free. Feel free to contact me, and I'll do my best. But
All right. I'm going to check the question bank, if that's all right.
do it.
Oh.
Oh goodness. My phone's doing something strange. There seems to be some comments.
Oh, that's good.
I can't see them. Yeah, there's 12. I don't know if they are questions.
No, they're not coming up on my screen. Sorry, folks. I bet you've got loads of questions you're itching to be answered. I'll tell you what.
There's loads.
Oh wow. I don't know why they're not appearing on my screen.
Okay, so shall I ask one?
Yeah, go for it.
So Dan Moe says, had I known about the Hastings rarities before this? Do you mean before this interview, or before doing taxidermy? I guess being a taxidermist, I've been to quite a lot of conferences, and the Hastings rarities is something that actually comes up quite a lot in the history of taxidermy if you go to a historical talk, because it's such a crazy story and a big part of taxidermy's history, and the fact that he's got a blue plaque and he's the only British taxidermist with a blue plaque for that reason, which is such a shame, rather than his kind of good things for the craft. So I did know about George Bristow before this, and I grew up quite near to Hastings, so I knew about the Hastings rarities and things because I'd visit Hastings Museum as a kid and stuff. So Yeah, I've known about it for a while. And the same person also asked, has my taxidermy stopped during lockdown? It hasn't stopped. I can still work from home. I've got freezers here and a few bits and bobs, and I've done a couple of things. And I've been making videos for Hastings Museum. And if you have a look on there, I'm sure if you're watching this already, you know already, but there's a mini lecture that came out yesterday, and the Bind Up craft project. But it's difficult for me to actually do taxidermy at home because I have a 2-year-old son who wants to help me with everything, and he's not quite at the age where it's safe for him to be touching scalpels and stuff. So it is a challenge.
Well,
but I do have a studio that I could go to, but we're trying not to, go out to already. So
will you encourage him to become a taxidermist, do you think?
I was saying only the other day that it would be such a dream to have one of these kind of, family business. Yeah, taxidermists in general do pass on, or historically pass on their trade to their children. So who knows?
That would be great. Yeah.
Turns out, my partner, his dad is an artist, Benjamin Phillips, and he. So if he turns out uncreative, we'd be, kicking ourselves really, or just completely shocked. I don't know.
So what other questions have we got?
Oh no, you can't see them. Someone's googling Joseph Cullingford.
Oh right.
Someone says, how do I clean my animals? Okay, so if you find an animal, the first thing I'd say is to freeze them straight away. Not because you need to necessarily for the actual taxidermy, but on the skin there'll be pests such as ticks and fleas and things like that. So if you freeze the animal, that will stop that part of it. And then when you skin the animal, you're not going to have them jumping onto you. And I completely remove the skin. So on mammals, there's no bones or anything attached to the skin apart from the very claws, so the very last digit of the bones on the feet. So I just have the skin, and then I have to pickle and tan the skin if it's a mammal. So essentially a process turning it kind of into leather, like you would if you were making leather for a bag or shoes. During that process, that cleans it, so I'll also wash it in detergents and things, and scrub out any dirt from the actual fur, and that process will stop it from falling apart in the future. It basically fixes all of the molecules around the fur and fixes them in place so they don't shed. And then with birds, you don't need to pickle and tan, but you essentially remove the skin, clean off all of the fat from the inside of the skin, and then I wash it in a taxidermy detergent called L5. If you were to look up on in a taxidermy shop, there's one JHT Supplies, John Hallett's Taxidermy Supplies is a good example. And L5 is like a taxidermy kind of special detergent, but you could just use fairy liquid or washing up liquid. It's any degreasing agent basically. And the washing stage is so crucial because if you don't wash the fur and the feathers well, then you'll end up with something very greasy that looks like a dead animal basically.
Cool.
I hope that answers that question. Can you still not see them?
No, I can't see any of the questions coming up. Last time it all flowed up from the bottom.
Oh no, okay. There's quite a few. Next one. What material do you use to put in the middle? Okay, so in the birds I use balsa wood. That's what I carve the body from. And in the mammals I use stuff called wood wool, which is basically a wood shaving. It's like, if you imagine a ball of wool but made out of wood, it's very similar, and I spray it with water to make it soft and malleable, and then I sculpt it around a wireframe, and I wrap cotton around it to build up the muscles. And then also the skull goes into the mammal taxidermy, so I clean the skull, and then all of the muscular structure around the face and the feet and anything else is all done with clay, and the eyes are made from acrylic or glass. And with the birds, there's more of the skeleton underneath the skin because the wings, the bones and the wings have to stay attached, and the skull and the legs. So it's more a process of removing the main body and cleaning all of the meat and fat from the skin. I hope that answers that one. Oh, Phil! I'm sorry you can't see. And someone says, what preservatives do I use? Do I use strong preservatives? I don't use strong preservatives like they would have done in the past. With the birds, you can essentially just clean all of the fat and dry the skin, and that is enough. Obviously, moths will find this delicious, and that's kind of the main problem. So I do make a paste that I paint on the inside of the skin that has things to keep insects away, such as turpentine, and it smells of cloves, and it's got a few other things in it. But with modern taxidermy, the best thing really is to case it to stop any insects getting in.
Yeah.
And with the mammals, as I said, I pickle and tan the skin, and that does a good job at preserving that and making it a little bit insect proof. But that is the risk of not using arsenic soap.
Yeah.
Stuff. Don't use it anymore.
I remember spending lots of time in a previous job at Canterbury Museums freezing lots of taxidermy before it went on display in the refurbished Beanie Museum. And there were other things in cases that I would put in the freezer, and then I would seal up all of the holes so that nothing else could get back in.
Yeah, whenever I do something new for a museum, it has to be frozen first, so just in case. So there's all that extra timing to put in.
Yeah.
The minute someone's walked into a museum, if it's in a case that's not quite secure, they're hazard to that work anyway, aren't they?
Yeah.
So it's tricky. So Nikki Louise says, I stuffed my first magpie the other day, and it looked hilarious. The neck was too long, and the wings were all wonky. But she was pleased she was finished. She finished it, and you should be pleased.
I'm going to open up my other laptop so I can see the questions. Feel free to continue.
Okay, Charlotte from the museum says, can we see? Yes, we'd love to see a picture. And Charlotte also says, how long will it take to taxidermy a rabbit from start to finish? The process is a long process. I'm really bad at figuring out exactly how long things take me, especially with mammals, because I'll skin a mammal and then I might pickle it for a week and tan it, and then I'm making the body. But it's a good few days. I normally have like a skinning day, like a dirty work day, where I'll skin a load of birds or mammals, and then I'll have the next day I'll have a cleaner day where I won't have any bodies out, and I'll just be building the sculptural parts, so carving bodies and making the bind-ups. And then whenever I mount an animal, which is the correct term, I'll always do that fresh first thing in the morning, so that the work's kind of as good as I can make it, and then I can still tinker all the way into the afternoon. I think the mistake some people make is that they want to get the whole thing done in a day, and by the time you're doing the most important part, the kind of mounting up and making it look real, that's when you're absolutely exhausted, and that's when you make it look unlike what it should look like. So I always recommend actually kind of cleaning your skins and getting it all in the freezer ready. And even if you feel like, you could start, just do something else, skin another animal and start, the next day. But obviously I have the luxury of time because this is my full-time job, whereas a lot of people having a go are doing it in the evenings after work or on weekends, or hopefully at the moment using this time to actually practice.
It's a great time to start a new hobby, I think.
Yeah, really good, but the only problem is this hobby involves things which are in need, such as latex gloves, and isopropyl alcohol and things, which is what I use to I defrost my birds in that to stop any bacteria growing on the skin and things like this. But you don't need to use any of those things. You can do it with bare hands. You can, lots of people prefer doing it that way. So yeah.
I suppose wearing gloves and things can affect your dexterity, can't it?
Yeah, quite a lot of people I teach actually prefer not to wear the gloves. And I think when I started, I used to hate wearing gloves actually, especially when working on little birds. I think it's just, it's only since, I've been sharing my studio with my partner for maybe like 8 years now, and I think because of that, he's an artist and not a taxidermist, and I'm just trying, because of that, I make my studios incredibly clean, which is always a disappointment if someone comes to photograph.
Yeah.
This what they expect to be a really gross taxidermy studio. So I wear gloves and clean everything well and sterilise my instruments and stuff.
Have we got any other fresh questions?
Someone says, Colin Jenner says, you must get to know the animal very well when working on them. Do you give them names? I do. I get to know the animals really well. I dream about them. If it's a really stressful project and it's taken me a long time, I think about them all the time. And then when they're finished, I can still think about all those tiny things which I wish I'd changed in the expression of their face, or just tiny little tweaks. But I'm not someone to give them names. Often lots of people do. I think for me, the love of taxidermy is definitely for the craft and the skill behind it. So when the actual piece is finished, I don't collect taxidermy, for instance. I don't really have it in my home. The only reason I have these is because so this parakeet and this pheasant are ones that I've done for demonstrations in museums, and so they're for my child. He loves them. And we have a couple of pieces in the house which I'm particularly fond of, but it was never a collecting hobby of mine, so I don't give them names and have that kind of relationship with them, if that makes sense.
I suppose
Which I think is a shame. I think people expect me to talk to them.
You would have a storage problem, I think, if you collected it.
Yeah, I would. And also I'd have a financial problem because I'd earn no money.
Yeah. I've got a house full of fossils, so they don't take up quite as much space as most taxidermy, though. Most of my fossils are very small.
Yeah, I try and collect those, but I'm rubbish at spotting them, to be honest.
Oh, well, I can give you some fossil hunting tips sometime. Yes, I don't know what's happened to my internet, but I can't see any of the questions on this laptop.
Okay,
you answer one while I try and sort out my internet.
Yeah, sure. The last one that I can see is, are you worried about the jump of pathogens from animals to humans? Pathogens meaning bugs and things, is that right?
I think they're asking about is there any risk of catching bird flu or something like that?
Yeah. So obviously there's a risk of catching certain things. In general, a wild animal is going to have to be very healthy to kind of exist in the wild. And if they've been hit by a car, it's probably because they've run across the road by mistake and they've got hit by a car, not because they were meandering and poorly and ill and full of disease. So they're generally going to be very fit animals, otherwise they don't survive. But there's obviously TB in badgers and rabies, and I think still in some bats and things like this. And so when I'm working with certain animals, I am very careful. And as I say, I wear gloves and I'm very clean.
Yeah.
But historically, taxidermists have got a really good. Is it mortality rate? No. What's the good? They live for a very.
They live for a long time. Yeah.
They get very old. Nearly into their hundreds and stuff. Even though they work with a lot of horrible chemicals and all sorts. So, and I doubt historically they used to actually wear gloves or clean their workspaces or even wash their hands.
Yeah.
So I think that, I'm not worried about things. When I was pregnant and I was working with badgers from an area that did have TB, that freaked me out a bit, but it's all in the saliva and things, so I was just very careful about those parts of the body, and I wore a bodysuit and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not worried, and touch wood, I've never, had any problems.
I've heard that some taxidermists they will eat the meat from the animals that they find dead on the side of the road.
Yeah, I think it's very common. I think.
We've got a internet problem twofold now. Let's see if I can fix it. Oh. It's probably somebody trying to watch a Netflix or something locally. Right. It seems to be working through my phone. Sorry.
Yeah. All I was going to say is that with the food, with people eating things, to do art about making a recipe only for cooking magazines and stuff. So it's obviously it's resourceful, I guess.
I remember once we ran over a pheasant in Dorset, and my dad stopped the car and picked it up, and then a few days later we had a sort of a pheasant version of coq au vin. It was okay.
Yeah, I bet it was. And there's one more question. Colin Jenner says, I heard a story that a large natural history museum storage facility had an air conditioning problem and all the animals exploded one weekend. Could that be true?
Ooh.
I have no idea.
I'm trying to think what kinds of... there might be something to do with some things preserved in spirit. That might create a problem.
Say it would be spirit collection.
Yeah. I can imagine that being a problem.
With taxidermy, I don't imagine that it getting too... If it gets too hot, the main problem is heat and cause problems, skin cracking happen, but not explosions. But yeah, if it was jars, as you say, of formalin or different alcohols, then probably if it gets to a certain temperature, it does explode. Yeah.
I do know of a museum that had a freezer in a store. And it was full of animals ready to be stuffed, and the curator was on holiday for 2 weeks, and the day he left for his holiday, the electricity failed.
Yeah.
So you can imagine what things were like when he returned 2 weeks later.
So disgusting. It's happened to me before.
Oh gosh.
Really horrible. I had a whole pig in that freezer.
Wow. Oh.
It was horrible.
Are there any other mishaps that you want to share?
I think the main mishaps, definitely when you're starting, is kind of when you've got something you think is really special and you do taxidermy on it and it looks in your eyes really awful. I'd say that, and everyone goes through that. Even I, went through that in the beginning. And also, one of the questions you'd written down was, what's the worst piece of taxidermy I'd ever seen?
Yes.
And basically, I just wanted to say that, there is obviously some horrendous taxidermy out there. But if it's old as well, in general, it might be that person's best attempt. And it's just really hard, is what I wanted to say, really. So it's kind of... there's some museums with some really good examples of terrible things. Definitely stoats and things always look a little bit dodgy. The Hastings Museum's got a good stoat that looks...
Oh, yeah, we had that on display in Wunderkammer.
Yeah,
I suppose...
There's some really good ones in the Booth Museum as well.
it all adds to the sort of the stories, really, doesn't it? And I can think of one very, very special or very famous example of wrong taxidermy, and that's the giant walrus at the Horniman Museum.
Yeah, he's brilliant because the skin was stretchy, so they just kept pushing the
Yeah.
they didn't stop. So rather than building the shape of the folds, it's just smooth.
Yeah. Oh, I look forward to seeing that one again. And I think the last time I saw it was actually, believe it or not, in Margate at the Turner Contemporary Museum, because they hauled it out of the Horniman Museum for a temporary exhibition there, which was quite a feat, really.
Yeah. Well, he's the flag waver for their museum, isn't he?
Yeah,
so
their mascot. Their mascot.
Saying, we exist, come and see us.
Yeah.
And we'll get this walrus over the country for you.
Yeah. What? I don't know what you know. Whether you know what all of the things we've got in the museum, but so if you could pick something that we've got as a mascot, what would it be?
For your museum?
Yeah.
Ooh, I think because of the stained glass windows, you'd have to pick one of your badgers.
One of the badgers.
I don't know. Like there's a few moments within the dioramas that I like at the museum. Obviously, it should maybe be one of the Hastings rarities birds. I'm not sure. I can't remember which ones there are. You've got a few.
Yeah.
But then you've got the beautiful stained glass windows, and there's some lovely badgers in the diorama.
Yeah.
But also there's that beaver in the grey. Is it grey?
Yeah. True.
Cabin. That beaver's pretty.
They've all seem to have had various cartoon versions made of them for, maybe we could have a sort of social media campaign where everybody has to vote for what animal becomes the museum mascot.
Sounds good. I think so. Yeah, definitely. I have a fox at Derby Museum, which is kind of on display without a case, and they did a mascot kind of challenge, and my fox was up against a pangolin, so obviously the fox didn't win.
Oh. I would have picked the fox, actually.
Thank you. Yeah.
Are there any more questions coming up? I think everybody's just waiting to see what crazy thing we're going to come up with to talk about next.
I know.
Yeah,
my phone's gone funny.
Yeah, my internet's not working very well as well. I wonder what is coming through. Can you see this?
If there's any no. If there's any that come through, I will reply manually afterwards.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's what I normally do.
But as the curator of the natural history collection, I think this is going to be a tricky one for you, because it's not you're a geologist. But what do you have a favourite one?
I haven't really looked at all of them, but one I find really, really interesting is actually a stuffed fish, and it's a sunfish.
Wow! You have a sunfish.
We have a sunfish. The scientific name being mola mola, and that was actually caught or washed up in Hastings, and it's something they're actually washed up, or they get caught quite often in British waters. They're really weird looking, and they can get huge. They can be well over a ton in weight. And we've got one which I hope to get back on display at some point, because it's from Hastings. And one thing of
that's such a great bit of social history.
Yeah, I think it was caught in the 1920s or something. But one thing I have to say about them is that you can't eat them because they're very poisonous. They're actually closely related to the pufferfish or fugu. So not to be eaten.
Even though they're so big, I imagine that some people have been tempted and tried them before.
I expect so. I wouldn't be surprised if some people have died trying to eat one.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds great.
But our specimen's not huge. Our specimen's only about 18 inches long or something like that.
Yeah. Is it in good condition?
Actually, yes, it's in very, very good condition. Recently, I stumbled across a photograph of it in the museum accession register, and it looks pretty much the same as it did then, pretty much 100 years ago.
Yeah, that's so cool because they're so big. Generally, they get knocked about in the stores because they're such a problem to.
That's right. Yeah, but there's a stingray next to it, which was also apparently caught in Hastings, which is interesting. And that's the tail of that's been completely sort of sheared off, hanging by a thread. Perhaps I'll get you to fix it one day if you like to.
I'd love to, yeah.
There's a lot of taxidermied fish in museums that are in need of a lot of TLC. They get neglected a bit.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, I mean they don't always look that great in the first place.
Yeah, they also stink.
Yeah, and the fact that as I said before about skin, fish have to be completely painted as well. All of that pigment goes, doesn't it? So
yeah,
it is also dependent on how good the paint job is.
Yeah.
And the degreasing, because very greasy things.
Yeah. One place that has some fantastic taxidermy fish is Canterbury Museums, and they're pretty much all in storage, sadly. But they got some fantastic things, enormous things like pike, and huge sea trout. You find them in rivers. But one sort of perhaps the final question for you would be: what is your favourite sort of taxidermy diorama that you've seen around the world?
I mean, I find I'm a little bit biased because the first place that I ever did taxidermy was the Booth Museum in Brighton. And I volunteered, basically I did an art degree and then I volunteered at the Booth Museum afterwards to do conservation because I thought I wanted to do just conservation of natural history objects, basically. And then the curator at the time, Jeremy Adams, let me do a bit of taxidermy, and actually that's why I do this now, because I ended up loving it. And so, as well as the fact that I do love that museum, the dioramas there, the bird cases, are all original from when Mr. Booth from the Booth Museum actually had them made. And they're just stunning. They're really beautiful, and they're just floor-to-ceiling cases of all of birds, really. And I absolutely love it there. I love the way it smells. It just, it's like
yeah, it's that classic museum smell, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's that real when I go there. I mean, it's like that real nostalgic. I feel like I'm at home almost feeling just because I love it so much.
Yeah.
So I'd recommend that one. Yeah. But it's not like the biggest, grandest one I've seen. Obviously, there's some incredible ones.
Yeah.
The ones in the Natural History Museum in New York have got to be the best, really.
Oh, yeah, because they're made famous by Night at the Museum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just, and they just look like they're real, basically.
Yeah. Similar ones at the Powell Cotton Museum. They are absolutely stunning.
Really amazing, yeah. And my favourite thing at Powell Cotton is the lion that nearly killed Mr. Powell Cotton.
Really? I didn't know that story. Gosh.
So I think it's I'm going to get the taxidermist wrong, so I'm not going to. I think it's Roland Ward, actually.
Oh yeah, very famous. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a Roland Ward, but basically, this lion nearly killed Mr. Powell Cotton when he was out hunting, and there was, I think, another man speared it, or he shot it, but either way, this lion could have killed this man that had obviously killed and collected all the animals at the Powell Cotton Museum, but instead they managed to kill this lion, and now it's on display. I can't remember if it's attacking a man or maybe it's attacking a wild boar or something, but it's doing something really aggressive just to show how violent this lion was. And that's amazing that's there.
Wow.
And, worth going to see for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I thoroughly recommend going to the Powell Cotton Museum. Another really good one is in Ipswich. Don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah, the little one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, nearly got a job there, and of course our boss used to work there, so he probably knows all about that one.
Yeah. They've got some really beautiful stuff with the is it the old? I'm going to say it wrong. Olgaby collection of all the birds in the caves.
Oh God, really, yeah, they're amazing. Yeah.
Really lovely.
Another favourite of mine is the Tring Museum.
And the best part of the Tring Museum for me is the collection of fleas wearing clothes.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, they're hilarious. Yeah.
Because Walter Rothschild, I think it's his great niece or someone, became a specialist of fleas. That was her specialism. And so they've got huge, and yeah, a couple of the ones with clothes on, which was a thing maybe in Mexico or something. Circus. That they've got some of.
Reminds me of John Hammond in Jurassic Park and his flea circus. Oh wow. Well, I think we've about finished now. What do you think? Are there any final questions? No?
Not that I can see, but my phone is finding it difficult, and I'm really
yeah, mine is as well. I think it's starting to give up.
Okay.
Well, thank you ever so much, Jazmine. I will let you go, and hopefully I'll be able to.
Thank you for having me.
That's all right. Thank you very much indeed. Take care.
I can't hear you.
Oh. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.